The wedding stopped before it started. 200 guests sat in absolute silence. The orchestra had stopped playing. The groom stood frozen at the altar. And the bride had just taken off her engagement ring. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Carefully. Almost respectfully. Then she placed it on the white table between them. The click of metal against wood echoed through the ballroom. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because this was not supposed to happen. The groom was Alexander Blackwood, billionaire, 34, owner of Blackwood Global, a man who had spent his entire adult life making certain that nothing happened outside of his control. The bride was Evelyn Hart, 27, unknown to most of the people in the room. A woman nobody believed belonged here, especially Alexander's family, especially his grandmother, the woman who had arranged this marriage. Alexander looked at the ring on the table, then at Evelyn. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Did you do it?" The room did not understand the question. 200 people looked from the bride to the groom and back again. Alexander said nothing. The silence stretched. Then the ballroom doors at the back opened, and Eleanor Blackwood walked in. Not in a wheelchair. Not carried. Slowly, weakly, but standing. The entire room turned, and Alexander Blackwood looked at the woman who had raised him walking through those doors, and understood that the answer to Evelyn's question was already visible to everyone present. He had done it, and now the wedding could begin. But to understand why the bride had removed her ring, and why that question mattered more than any of the 37 conditions in the contract, you have to go back 6 months. To a door that opened 3 times. If you have ever watched someone punish themselves for loving the wrong way, this story is for you. Welcome to Aurora Cinema Fiction. Stay with us. If this story moves you, please subscribe, like and share. It means everything to this channel. Evelyn Hart was sitting in her apartment marking student essays on a Tuesday evening when someone knocked on her door. She was not expecting anyone. She opened it. The man standing in the hallway was wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent and looking at her the way people look at problems they have already decided how to solve. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in the city recognized Alexander Blackwood. She did not invite him in. "Whatever you are selling, I am not buying. I am not selling anything." "Then you have the wrong apartment." She started to close the door. He placed one hand against it. Not forcefully. "Just enough. I have a proposal. I am not interested. You haven't heard it. I don't need to." She pushed the door closed. He knocked again. She opened it again. He held out an envelope. Inside was a document. 37 conditions. 1 year. $5 million. No romance. No intimacy. No questions asked. Just play the role of his wife until his grandmother's final wish was fulfilled. Evelyn read the document carefully. Then she handed it back. No. She closed the door. He knocked a 3rd time. She did not open it immediately. She stood on the other side with her hand pressed flat against the wood and waited. He knocked again. She opened it. "I said no. My grandmother is dying." Something shifted in her expression. Not sympathy exactly. Recognition. She had lost her own mother 2 years earlier. She knew what that particular sentence cost a person to say. "Her one wish is to see me married before she goes. I need someone who cannot be bought or manipulated. Someone who will not fall apart under pressure. Someone who will treat her like a person and not like a transaction." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Not at the suit. Not at the name. At the man underneath both of those things. She saw something she had not expected to see. Not calculation. Fear. The specific fear of a person who is running out of time and knows it. 3 months, she said. Not a year. 3 months with a review. He agreed before she finished the sentence. She should have noticed that. A man who agrees that quickly has already won something. She simply did not yet know what. The Blackwood estate was not a home. It was a statement. Every room designed to communicate something about the family that occupied it. Power, legacy, permanence. Evelyn walked through it on the first morning and understood immediately that nothing in this building had been chosen for comfort. Everything had been chosen for impression. Alexander moved through it like a man who had never considered that a house could feel like anything other than an operational base. Breakfast was efficient. Conversation was functional. He outlined the schedule for the week. Events they needed to attend together. People they needed to be seen with. Photographs that needed to be taken. Evelyn listened. Then she asked one question. When do I meet her? Alexander looked up from his phone. Sunday. I would like to meet her today. Sunday is when I have scheduled. Today. Something moved across his face. Not irritation. Something closer to surprise. Nobody interrupted Alexander Blackwood's schedule. Nobody said today when he had said Sunday. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said fine, and went back to his phone. Evelyn went to find Eleanor Blackwood. She found her in a small sitting room at the back of the house. A room that felt nothing like the rest of the estate. Warm, slightly cluttered, books everywhere. A half-finished cup of tea on the table beside a chair that had clearly been sat in thousands of times. Eleanor looked up when Evelyn appeared in the doorway. She was smaller than Evelyn had imagined. Frailer. With the specific brightness in her eyes, of someone whose body is failing, but whose mind had decided not to. You must be the girl. Evelyn. Come in then, don't stand in doorways, it's a terrible habit. Evelyn came in. She sat down. They talked for 3 hours. Not about Alexander. Not about the contract. About books. About the city. About the garden Eleanor could no longer tend herself, but still directed from the window. About Evelyn's students, and what it felt like to watch a child understand something for the first time. About the particular loneliness of large houses. When Alexander came to collect her for dinner, Evelyn was still there. He stood in the doorway. Eleanor looked at him. She stays for dinner. It was not a request. Alexander looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Eleanor. I would love to, she said. That evening at dinner, something shifted. Alexander had spent the meal watching Evelyn without appearing to watch her. The way she listened to Eleanor. The way she asked questions nobody else thought to ask. The way Eleanor laughed. A real laugh. The kind Eleanor rarely produced for anyone anymore. After dinner, when Evelyn had gone to help Eleanor to her room, Alexander sat alone at the table. He sat there for a long time, doing something he rarely did. Nothing. Over the following weeks, a pattern established itself. Alexander managed the public version of the marriage, the events, the photographs, the carefully worded statements to the press. Evelyn managed Eleanor, not in the way of someone performing a duty, in the way of someone who had found a person worth spending time with, and was spending time with them. She arrived at Eleanor's sitting room every morning with 2 cups of tea. She read to her when Eleanor's eyes were tired. She listened when Eleanor talked about the past. She asked questions nobody else had thought to ask. One morning, Eleanor said something that stayed with her. You know, you are the first person who has ever told that boy no. Evelyn looked up from her book. He told you that. He didn't have to. I can see it. He looks at you differently. He looks at me like I am a problem he cannot solve. Eleanor smiled. Yes, that is what I mean. She set down her tea. Alexander has spent 34 years making certain that everything goes according to his plan. People say yes to him. They move when he tells them to move. They stay when he tells them to stay. She looked at Evelyn steadily. You opened the door 3 times when he knocked. Most people would have opened it the first time. Most people would not have opened it at all. Eleanor laughed. A real laugh. The kind that cost her something physically, but she paid it anyway. But you opened it because you wanted to, not because of the name. Evelyn said nothing. That is rarer than you think, Eleanor said quietly. In this family, in this house, in his life. She picked up her tea again. He doesn't know what to do with it, with you, and that is the most interesting thing that has happened to him in years. Evelyn looked at her. You planned this. Eleanor did not answer, but she did not deny it either. She simply looked out the window at the garden she could no longer tend, and smiled. There were other evenings when the public schedule was finished and the house was quiet, and Alexander would find Evelyn reading in the library, and instead of passing through, he would stop. He would sit down, not because he needed to, because the room felt different when she was in it. One evening she looked up from her book and found him watching her. Not the way he watched things he was calculating. The way he watched things he did not yet understand. What? She said. Nothing. He went back to his work, but he did not leave the library. Another evening he came home from a difficult board meeting. He said nothing about it. He sat across from her at dinner, and for 20 minutes neither of them spoke. Then she said, "Do you want to talk about it?" He looked at her. No. She nodded, and said nothing more. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "The Morrison acquisition is collapsing. 3 years of work." She put down her fork and listened. He talked for 40 minutes. She did not offer solutions. She did not offer reassurance. She simply listened. When he finished, she said, "That sounds exhausting." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. Something in his expression was different. Not softer exactly. More open. The expression of a man who had just discovered that being heard felt different from being advised. He was not sure what to do with that discovery, but he did not forget it. It started with small things. The way certain staff members became careful when particular names were mentioned. The way family members who visited looked at Eleanor and then quickly looked away. The way Eleanor herself would go very still whenever someone mentioned the Blackwood family history before a certain year. Evelyn noticed all of it. She was a teacher. She had spent years learning to read rooms, to notice the things people were trying not to show. One afternoon she asked Alexander's cousin something ordinary about the family. The cousin smiled too quickly, changed the subject too smoothly, the way people do when they have been specifically told not to discuss something. One evening she found an old photograph in the library, a family portrait. She studied the faces. Alexander was there, young, perhaps 6 years old. Eleanor was there, but something about the composition was wrong. Eleanor was not standing with the family the way a grandmother stands with a family. She was standing slightly apart, the way a guest stands, or a staff member, someone who belonged and did not belong at the same time. Evelyn put the photograph back. She went to find Eleanor instead. She sat down with her tea. She looked at the older woman for a long moment. "How long have you known Alexander?" Eleanor looked at her. "All his life. From birth. From very young. Not from birth. From very young." Evelyn held that difference and said nothing. She looked out at the garden. "He loves you," she said. "Whatever else is true, he loves you." Eleanor's face did something complicated. "I know," she said quietly. "And you love him." "More than anything I have ever loved in my life." The room was very quiet. Evelyn nodded once, and did not ask another question that evening. But she had already understood that the question she needed to ask was not one Eleanor could answer for her. She found it by accident. She was not looking for it. She had been searching for a document Alexander had asked her to retrieve from his study and had opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a medical file. Recent. Eleanor Blackwood. Patient history. Evelyn looked at the file for a long moment. She should have closed the drawer. She did not close the drawer. She picked up the file. She read the first page, then the second. Then she sat down on the floor of Alexander's study with the file in her hands and read every page. When she finished, she sat very still. The file contained Eleanor's complete medical history. It also contained a section on family background, biological relatives, next of kin. The boxes were empty, not filled in incorrectly. Empty. With a note from the attending physician. Patient has no verifiable biological relatives. All family documentation submitted for verification returned inconsistencies. Legal next of kin listed as Alexander Blackwood. Biological relationship unconfirmed. Evelyn set the file down on the floor beside her. She sat with her back against Alexander's desk in the quiet of his study, and understood that the marriage she had agreed to was built on a foundation she had not been told the truth about. The woman in the sitting room, with the warm books, and the 2 cups of tea, and the garden she directed from the window. The woman who had laughed at her stories about students. The woman who had said, "He looks at you differently," was not Alexander Blackwood's grandmother. Not biologically. Not legally. Not in any verifiable way. Keep watching. The best part is coming. She did not confront Alexander that night. She waited. She thought carefully. The following evening she sat across from him and asked the questions he could not answer smoothly. Questions that found the edges of things he had spent months keeping flat. Eventually, Alexander set down his pen and told her everything. Eleanor was not his grandmother. She had never been his grandmother. 28 years ago, there had been a fire at a hospital in the city. A catastrophic fire. In the chaos, a nurse named Eleanor had found a 2-year-old boy alone in a corridor. No parents. No identification. She carried him out. She kept him safe. She spent months afterward trying to find his family. Filed reports. Contacted authorities. Searched through every record. But the fire had destroyed documentation. The boy had no verifiable origin, and Eleanor had already spent 6 months loving him. She kept searching for another year. Then she stopped. Not because she gave up, because she had become his family. She forged the documents. Not for money, not for inheritance, for him. So he would have a name, a history, a grandmother, a life. Alexander's voice was completely flat when he said the next part. He had found out 4 months ago. He had confronted Eleanor. She had admitted everything, every lie, every forged document. Every year she had allowed him to believe something that was not true, and in his rage he had said something he could not take back. "You stole my life," Eleanor had cried, for the first time he had ever seen, and he had kept going. "From today I don't have a grandmother." Then he had walked away. He had not been back. Evelyn sat very still when he finished. "You have known for 4 months," she said. "Yes. And you arranged this marriage during those 4 months." "Yes. Because she asked to see you married." "Yes. So you gave her a performance instead of yourself." He said nothing. The room was very quiet. "You told her she stole your life," Evelyn said. "She did. She carried you out of a burning building when you were 2 years old. She spent a year searching for your family. She gave you her name and everything she had. She looked at him directly. Tell me one thing she ever took for herself." Alexander's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because there was nothing. In 28 years of giving everything to a child, she had not been born to love. There was nothing Eleanor had taken for herself. Not one thing. The silence that followed that realization was the heaviest thing in the room. "You are not punishing her anymore," Evelyn said quietly. "You stopped punishing her the moment you felt guilty. Now you are punishing yourself, and you will keep doing it for the rest of your life if something does not change." She stood. "She is in a hospital because of what happened between you. The doctors say the physical condition existed before, but heartbreak accelerated everything." She walked to the door, then stopped. You built 37 conditions to protect a marriage that was never real. You spent 4 months arranging a performance for a woman who only ever wanted you. She looked at him. That is the saddest thing I have ever heard. And she left him alone in his office, with his hands on the desk, and nothing to say to an empty room. The scandal broke 3 days later. Not because Evelyn said anything, because Alexander's cousin had been talking, and the wrong person had been listening. By morning it was in the press. Eleanor Blackwood's documents, the forged records, the hospital fire. The 2-year-old with no verified origin. The Blackwood family erupted. Relatives who had spent decades accepting Eleanor as family suddenly had opinions about fraud and inheritance and the validity of Alexander's name. Then the calls started. The board chairman called first. His voice was measured in the way voices are measured when a decision has already been made and is simply being communicated. He told Alexander that an emergency session had been convened to discuss his fitness to lead Blackwood Global, given the circumstances surrounding his family background. Alexander said he would attend. He hung up. Then his uncle called, the family's senior member. He had already contacted the estate lawyer. He wanted Eleanor removed from the property. Her right to remain was being questioned on the basis of the forged documentation. He framed it as protecting the family. Alexander said he would look into it. He hung up. Then his assistant knocked and said a journalist from one of the largest newspapers in the country was requesting a statement. They wanted to know whether Alexander intended to pursue legal action against Eleanor for fraud, whether he would be contesting the legitimacy of any inheritance she had received, whether he considered himself a victim. Alexander sat at his desk and looked at the 3 calls on his screen. His company, his family's legal position, his public image. Everything he had built was now contingent on what he did next. And in the middle of all of it, Eleanor sat alone in a hospital room. Because he had not come, Evelyn went. She went alone without telling anyone. She expected to find someone she would struggle to feel sympathy for. What she found was a small room with machines and monitors, and the particular silence of a place where people are waiting. Eleanor was awake. She looked smaller than she had in the sitting room. Frailer. But her eyes were the same. That particular brightness. That specific alertness. Eleanor looked at her when she walked in. You came. Yes. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Evelyn sat down beside the bed. She looked at the photograph on the bedside table. A small boy. Dark hair. Perhaps 6 years old. Laughing at something outside the frame. The edges of the photograph were worn. Not from age. From being touched. Held. Thousands of times over decades. Is that him? Evelyn said. His 6th birthday. Eleanor looked at the photograph. He had just understood that birthday cake meant he could have sugar for breakfast, and he found this the funniest thing anyone had ever told him. A pause. He laughed for about 10 minutes. I have never heard anything like it before or since. Evelyn looked at the worn edges. You kept it beside you. I keep everything, every drawing he ever made me, every school report, every photograph, every certificate. Eleanor looked toward the window. I know what I did was wrong. I have known it every single day. But I also know that I loved him every single day, and I am not certain those 2 things cancel each other out. Evelyn said nothing for a long time. The press has the story, she said eventually. I know. The family is moving against you. The board is convening an emergency session about Alexander. His uncle wants you removed from the estate. Eleanor's face did not collapse. She had already known something like this was coming. If he never forgives me, she said quietly, that is fair. What I did was wrong, but I hope one day he forgives himself. Evelyn looked at her. For what? For the things he said to me. He will carry them. I know him. He will carry them long after I am gone, and they will become heavier, not lighter. She looked at Evelyn. That is what I am afraid of. Not for me, for him. Evelyn sat with that for a long time, looking at the photograph on the table, at the worn edges, at a woman who had just been publicly exposed and whose first concern was what the exposure was doing to the person who had exposed her. She stood up. "I am going to give him a condition," she said. Eleanor looked at her. "Before this wedding happens, I am going to require something from him." "What condition?" Evelyn looked at her steadily. "That he publicly acknowledges you as his family. Legally. On record. Not privately. Not quietly. In front of everyone who matters." The room was silent. "That will cost him," Eleanor said. "The board, the family's legal position, his reputation, all of it becomes more complicated." "Yes. Why would you ask that of him?" Evelyn looked at the photograph one more time. At the laughing boy. At the worn edges from being touched thousands of times. "Because you deserve it," she said simply, "and because he needs to do it. For me. For himself." She picked up her bag. "Take care of yourself," she said. "The wedding is in 4 days." Eleanor looked at her. "You really think he will do it?" Evelyn paused at the door. "I think," she said, "that he is a man who has spent 34 years not knowing what to do with someone who refuses to simply agree with him." She looked at Eleanor. "And I have never agreed with him once." 2 days before the wedding, Evelyn handed Alexander a document. 1 page. 1 condition. He reached for it without looking up from his desk. "Whatever it is, fine. Read it." Something in her voice made him look up. He read it. His face changed, then went very still. The conditions stated that before the wedding took place, Alexander Blackwood was required to publicly and legally acknowledge Eleanor Blackwood as his family. Not a private visit. Not a quiet reconciliation. A formal public acknowledgement. On record, in a statement released to the press. Undoing every piece of the scandal that had broken days earlier. He set the page down. "No. Then there is no wedding." He looked at her. "You cannot be serious. The contract requires both parties to fulfill their agreed obligations. I am adding one. You cannot add conditions after the fact." "I just did." He stood up. The coldness that settled over him was the coldness of a man who has been challenged in a way he does not know how to manage. "You don't understand what she did." "I understand exactly what she did. She lied to me for 28 years. Yes. She built my entire identity on something false. Yes. She took away my right to know who I actually am. Yes, she did all of those things." Evelyn did not look away. "And you are not punishing her anymore. You haven't been punishing her for months. You are punishing yourself. And every day you refuse to face what you said to her, you add more weight to something you will carry forever." The office was very quiet. "She is being attacked publicly because of something that happened 28 years ago," Evelyn said. "The press, your family, your board, all of them treating a woman who carried you out of a burning building like a criminal." She held his gaze. "You keep saying she stole your life, but she gave up hers. Tell me one thing she ever took for herself." Silence. Alexander opened his mouth. Closed it. "There isn't one," Evelyn said. "Not in 28 years. Not one thing." The office was absolutely still. "This condition is not about protecting her reputation," Evelyn said. "It is about who you are going to be. The man who let the world destroy the person who raised him, because it was easier than facing what he said to her, or someone else entirely." She picked up her bag. 4 days ago, you sat across from me and talked for 40 minutes about the Morrison acquisition, and I sat there and listened, because I wanted to." She looked at him. "Not because of the contract, because somewhere in the last 3 months, I stopped thinking of you as a transaction." She walked to the door. "I would like you to do the same." And she left. Alexander stood in his office alone. For a very long time. He went that night, not because she told him to, because he sat in his office for 4 hours after she left, and understood that the weight he was carrying was not going to become lighter by itself. It was only going to become permanent. The hospital was quiet. He stood outside the room for a long time. Then he went in. Eleanor was asleep. He stood beside the bed and looked at her. She looked smaller than he remembered. Frailer. The woman who had filled every room she walked into with a specific kind of energy. Looking now like someone whose body had been making considerable effort for a considerable time. He was about to leave. Then he saw them. On the shelf beside the bed. A stack of cards. Drawings. Certificates. Photographs. He walked over slowly. The drawings were his. He recognized his own handwriting from when he was small. Crayon, uneven letters. Alexander, age 6. Alexander, age 7. Birthday cards he had made her at school. Get well cards from when she had been ill once when he was 9, and he had been so frightened, he had made her 17 cards in one afternoon. He remembered making them. He had not known she still had them. He had not known she had kept everything. Every school report. Every certificate. Every photograph. Every piece of paper that documented a life she had built for him from nothing. He stood there for a long time, looking at the evidence of what she had done, not the lies. The love underneath the lies. The specific love of a person who had carried a 2-year-old out of a burning building and then spent 28 years making certain that child never felt the weight of what had been lost. Eleanor woke up. She looked at him. She started crying immediately. Not dramatically. The tears of someone who had not believed they would see this again. Alexander sat down beside the bed. "You should have told me," he said. "I know. From the beginning, you should have told me. I know, I was afraid." "Of what?" Eleanor looked at her hands. "That you would leave, that you would look at me the way you looked at me that day." A pause. "And then that day came anyway. And you left anyway, and I understood that I had spent 28 years afraid of the wrong thing." Alexander looked at the shelf of cards and drawings. At the 17 get-well cards from when he was 9. At the photograph with the worn edges on the bedside table. "You kept everything. Everything. Why?" Eleanor looked at him. "Because you were mine," she said simply. "Whatever else was true, you were mine, and I was yours, and no document was going to change that." The room was very quiet. The machines tracked their small, steady measurements. Alexander reached over. He covered her hand with his. Her hand was very cold, very light. "You should have told me," he said again. "I know, but you are still my family." Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in months she could breathe. He stayed until she slept. Then he went home. He sat at his desk. He opened his laptop. He wrote the statement himself. No lawyers. No communications team. No carefully managed language. Just the truth. Plainly stated. Eleanor Blackwood raised me. She gave up everything she had to give me a life. What she did was wrong. What she gave me was real. She is my family. She has always been my family. And I am asking the people who work for me, and the people who share my name, to treat her accordingly. He sent it before he could reconsider. Then he sat in the quiet of his office. And for the first time in 4 months, the weight was not heavier than it had been the day before. The ballroom was full. 200 guests. The orchestra playing. Flowers everywhere. Everything exactly as arranged. Alexander stood at the altar and watched the doors at the back of the ballroom, waiting. The processional began. Then Evelyn appeared at the end of the aisle. She was not looking at him yet. She was looking straight ahead, with the particular composure of someone who has made a decision and is walking toward it. Then she looked at him. And something passed between them that had nothing to do with contracts or conditions or 37 clauses. She walked toward him. When she reached the altar, she reached into her handbag. She removed the engagement ring. She placed it on the small table that had been set beside them. The room went silent. 200 people who did not understand. Alexander looked at the ring, then at her. What are you doing? Did you do it? Nobody in the room understood the question. Alexander held her gaze. Then he said, yes. Evelyn looked at him for a moment, long enough to see that he meant it, long enough to see that something in him had shifted. Not temporarily, not as performance. Permanently. The way things shift when a person has finally stopped running. Then the ballroom doors at the back opened, and Eleanor Blackwood walked in. Not in a wheelchair, not dramatically. Slowly, weakly, but standing. One hand on the arm of a nurse who had agreed to come. The entire room turned. Alexander walked back down the aisle toward her. Not because the ceremony required it, because she was there. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. All the months of silence between them, all the weight of what had been said and what had not been said. I was wrong, he said. Eleanor shook her head. We both were. But you are still my family. Her face broke open. Not dramatically. The way faces break open when something held under enormous pressure for an enormous amount of time finally releases. Alexander put his arms around her. Gently. The way you hold something very fragile that you are afraid of damaging further. The room was completely silent. 200 people watching a man hold the woman who had carried him out of a burning building 28 years ago, who had kept every card, every drawing, every certificate, who had touched a photograph so many times its edges had worn smooth. Who had said if he never forgives me that is fair, but I hope he forgives himself. Then Alexander turned. He looked at Evelyn standing at the altar. She was not crying. She was looking at him the way she had looked at him since the first evening. Like he was worth the full attention. He walked back up the aisle. He stood in front of her. She picked up the ring from the table. She held it out to him. He took it. He held it for a moment. You knew I needed to do that before I could do this, he said. Yes. You could have simply told me. You would not have listened. He looked at her. No, he said. I would not have. He slid the ring onto her finger. And for the first time that evening, the orchestra began to play something that felt like it meant what it was supposed to mean. The wedding that had stopped before it started finally began. Not because of a contract, not because of 37 conditions, but because of one. The condition that had nothing to do with money or reputation, or the careful management of appearances. The condition that simply said, before you marry me, you have to stop running from the people who love you. Alexander Blackwood had spent 34 years running. Evelyn Hart had simply refused to run with him. And Eleanor Blackwood had carried a worn photograph for 28 years, and believed that love given imperfectly was still love worth giving. And in the end, all three of them had been right about the same thing. That some things cannot be contracted, cannot be scheduled, cannot be arranged in 37 conditions, or delivered on a Sunday when today was what was needed. Some things simply require a person to open the door, even when they have already said no twice. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Aurora Cinema Fiction, leave a comment below, and tell us where in the world you are watching from. You might be surprised how many people felt exactly what you just felt. And remember, every story we tell is made with one purpose: to make you feel deeply and remind you that love in all its forms is always worth fighting for.